Ladies and gentlemen, aging is inevitable, but how we age, that's a different story. The reality is that some people grow old with dignity, wisdom, and grace, while others allow the worst parts of their personality to take over. The truth is that there are certain habits, attitudes, and behaviors that emerge in old age that no one dares to call out. These things push people away, diminish respect, and isolate you from those who once cared. And whether people say it out loud or not, they notice. So today, let's face some hard truths and talk about 6 ugly things that can creep into old age if you're not careful. Complaining is one of the easiest habits to fall into, especially as life presents more challenges and disappointments over time. It is effortless to see what is wrong with the world, to point out the flaws in people, to dwell on past mistakes, and to fixate on what should have been. But the real question is, what does all this complaining accomplish? Does it solve problems? Does it build relationships? Does it create a legacy worth remembering? The answer is no. Complaining without action drains energy, repels people, and ultimately leaves you stuck in a cycle of dissatisfaction. The reality is that every moment spent complaining is a moment that could have been spent creating solutions. People respect those who take responsibility, those who seek answers, those who find ways to adapt and improve. But those who only complain, who see themselves as perpetual victims of circumstance, end up losing influence. No one wants to be around someone who constantly highlights the negative without offering a way forward. And over time, the people who complain the most become the ones who are listened to the least. One of the greatest dangers of constant complaining is that it warps your perception of reality. The more you complain, the more you train your mind to look for problems. The brain adapts to whatever it is fed, and if it is fed a steady diet of negativity, that is all it will see. Eventually, even good things will be met with skepticism, even opportunities will be dismissed as not good enough, and even relationships will suffer under the weight of unrelenting dissatisfaction. Complaining also pushes people away. No one wants to spend time with someone who is constantly draining the energy from the room. Conversations with a chronic complainer become exhausting because there is no balance, no light, no recognition of the good that exists alongside the bad. Instead of being a source of wisdom, encouragement, or inspiration, a complainer becomes a person to be avoided. People might nod along, they might even pretend to listen, but deep down they are looking for a way out of the conversation. When someone complains more than they contribute, they also diminish their own sense of power. Instead of focusing on what they can control, they dwell on everything that is out of their hands. Instead of taking responsibility for what they can change, they fixate on what others should be doing differently. This mindset is a trap because it leads to passivity, frustration, and ultimately a sense of helplessness. The truth is that no matter how unfair life may seem, there is always something that can be done, always a way to move forward, always a choice to be made. Complaining without contribution also destroys gratitude. Gratitude is one of the most powerful tools a person can have. It shifts perspective, builds resilience, and fosters a sense of contentment. But when complaining takes over, gratitude disappears. The focus moves away from what is going right and lingers on what is going wrong. Over time, this creates a deep-seated bitterness that blinds a person to the blessings in their life. And once gratitude is gone, happiness is not far behind. Another consequence of excessive complaining is that it becomes a habit that spreads. People who complain often attract others who do the same. Misery loves company, and before long a cycle of negativity is formed. Instead of uplifting and encouraging one another, conversations become competitions about who has it worse. This kind of mindset is contagious, and it destroys motivation, innovation, and personal growth. Instead of striving to be better, people settle for justifying why things cannot change. Complaining also affects physical and mental health. Studies have shown that constant negativity increases stress, weakens the immune system, and even rewires the brain for pessimism. People who complain frequently tend to experience higher levels of anxiety and depression because their minds are always focused on problems rather than solutions. The body responds to thoughts, and a person who fills their mind with negativity will eventually see it manifest in their health and well-being. There is also a deeper truth that many fail to recognize. Complaining is often a defense mechanism. It is easier to complain about a problem than it is to fix it. It is easier to criticize than to create. It is easier to blame external factors than to take personal responsibility. But the easy road rarely leads to anything worthwhile. Growth requires effort, improvement demands action, and a meaningful life is built by those who choose to contribute rather than complain. One of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that no one is coming to fix things for you. No one is going to step in and make everything right. The people who succeed, who find peace, who leave behind a meaningful impact are the ones who take ownership of their circumstances. They recognize that while they may not be able to control everything, they can always control their attitude, their effort, and their ability to contribute something of value. In the end, complaining is a choice. A person can choose to see themselves as powerless, as someone at the mercy of an unfair world, or they can choose to take responsibility for the things within their control. They can choose to focus on problems, or they can focus on solutions. They can spend their time dwelling on what is wrong, or they can use their time to create something better. The choice is always there, and the consequences of that choice will define the course of a person's life. As people age, there is a natural tendency to settle into patterns of thought and behavior that feel familiar and comfortable. Routines become second nature, beliefs solidify, and perspectives become difficult to challenge. While stability can be beneficial, an unwillingness to change can lead to stagnation, isolation, and an inability to adapt to the realities of an evolving world. When a person refuses to embrace new ideas or approaches, they risk becoming disconnected from society, alienated from younger generations, and resistant to personal growth. Rigidity in thinking often stems from a deep-seated fear of the unknown. Change requires effort, and effort becomes increasingly difficult as energy levels decline. Rather than confronting new information with curiosity, a rigid person will dismiss it outright, believing that their experience outweighs any fresh perspective. This mindset creates a barrier between them and the world around them, making meaningful conversation and learning nearly impossible. Over time, their world shrinks because they refuse to let anything new enter. Unwillingness to change also leads to frustration, particularly when the world does not conform to old expectations. Society, technology, and culture are always evolving, and those who refuse to adapt often find themselves feeling left behind. They become resentful, blaming younger generations for doing things differently, rather than recognizing that adaptation is a necessary part of life. This frustration manifests as bitterness, making interactions with others increasingly difficult, which in turn pushes people away. A rigid person tends to cling to the past, often romanticizing how things used to be while dismissing the present as inferior. While there is value in tradition and history, an obsession with the past prevents a person from fully engaging with the present. They may refuse to adopt new technology, resist new ways of thinking, or dismiss modern conveniences as unnecessary or even harmful. But progress does not stop for anyone, and resisting it only creates unnecessary hardship. This unwillingness to change also affects relationships. Friends and family members may attempt to introduce new ideas, encourage new experiences, or suggest alternative ways of doing things, only to be met with rejection. Over time, people stop trying. Conversations become predictable and unfulfilling, and interactions feel strained because one person is unwilling to consider another's point of view. Eventually, this leads to emotional distance, making the rigid person feel more isolated and misunderstood. In many cases, this stubborn resistance to change comes from pride. People do not want to admit that they might be wrong, that their way of thinking might be outdated, or that there is still more to learn. A lifetime of experience can create a false sense of superiority, convincing someone that they no longer need to listen, adjust, or evolve. But humility is the key to growth at any stage of life, and those who refuse to acknowledge their own limitations rob themselves of the opportunity to improve. Another consequence of rigidity is that it makes a person incapable of handling unexpected challenges. Life is unpredictable, and those who thrive are the ones who can adapt. If someone is unwilling to adjust their mindset, they become unable to navigate difficulties effectively. They hold on to rigid solutions that no longer work, refuse to acknowledge alternative paths, and become overwhelmed by circumstances they cannot control. Adaptability is what allows a person to remain resilient, while rigidity only leads to frustration and defeat. A refusal to change also means a refusal to learn. No matter how much knowledge a person accumulates, there is always more to discover. The world is filled with new ideas, new perspectives, and new opportunities for growth. Those who stop learning are not just standing still, they are falling behind. Intellectual stagnation leads to mental decline, making it harder to engage in meaningful discussions, understand different viewpoints, or appreciate the richness of an ever-changing world. This rigidity even impacts physical health. Studies have shown that people who embrace new experiences and challenges remain sharper and more engaged as they age. Those who refuse to adapt, however, often become sedentary, both physically and mentally. They reject activities that push them outside their comfort zones, avoid situations that require flexibility, and ultimately limit their own ability to thrive. The mind and body both require stimulation, and refusing to change leads to a slow deterioration of both. Ultimately, an unwillingness to change results in a life that becomes smaller and smaller. Conversations become repetitive, experiences become limited, relationships grow distant, and opportunities for joy and growth are lost. The world does not wait for those who resist it, and those who refuse to change find themselves left behind. The greatest tragedy is that it is entirely avoidable, because change is not something that happens to a person, it is something a person must choose to embrace. Respect is not something that can be demanded, it must be earned through action, character, and consistency. Many people, especially as they grow older, fall into the trap of believing that their age, past accomplishments, or mere existence entitles them to automatic respect. They expect younger generations, colleagues, and even strangers to treat them with deference without demonstrating the qualities that command admiration. This mindset leads to disappointment, resentment, and a growing disconnect from the world around them. When respect is expected without being earned, interactions become strained. People may outwardly comply out of politeness or obligation, but their words and gestures will lack sincerity. True respect cannot be forced, it must be cultivated through behavior that inspires trust and admiration. Those who expect it without demonstrating humility, wisdom, or integrity often find themselves frustrated when others do not respond the way they desire. Respect is closely tied to contribution. In any social or professional setting, people who provide value to others naturally gain the admiration and recognition of those around them. But when someone stops contributing, believing that their past efforts should be enough to secure lifelong respect, they quickly become irrelevant. The world moves forward, and those who refuse to keep up or add value find themselves left behind, resenting others for not giving them what they believe they deserve. One of the clearest signs of expecting respect without earning it is complaining about how things used to be better or how people used to have more manners. While culture and social norms do evolve, the truth is that respect has always been something that must be built through personal actions. Those who rely on nostalgia rather than present-day effort create an image of themselves as bitter rather than wise, pushing others away rather than drawing them in. Entitlement to respect often manifests in frustration with younger generations. Instead of leading by example or mentoring with patience, many people resort to criticizing, lecturing, or dismissing new ideas outright. This creates a divide between generations, making meaningful connection and dialogue nearly impossible. Younger people respect those who offer guidance with understanding, not those who demand obedience without showing understanding themselves. Actions always speak louder than words. Someone who consistently demonstrates integrity, patience, and wisdom will be respected naturally. But those who constantly remind others of their status, age, or past accomplishments in an attempt to command respect only alienate those around them. People respect actions, not demands, and the more a person tries to force respect through words, the less likely they are to receive it. One of the fastest ways to lose respect is to believe it should come without accountability. Everyone, no matter their position or experience, must be willing to acknowledge mistakes, grow from them, and admit when they are wrong. Those who refuse to do so, believing themselves above correction, do not inspire admiration, they inspire frustration. Respect is built on honesty, and when someone refuses to hold themselves accountable, they weaken their own credibility. Another way entitlement to respect manifests is through a refusal to listen. Many people, particularly as they grow older, assume that their perspective is the only one that matters. They dominate conversations, dismiss new viewpoints, and insist on being heard without offering the same courtesy to others. But respect is a two-way street, and those who do not listen will eventually find that no one listens to them in return. Genuine respect is not tied to age, authority, or past success. It is tied to character. A person who treats others with kindness, humility, and fairness will always be respected, regardless of their position. But those who believe that their past achievements or seniority entitle them to automatic reverence often become frustrated when they do not receive it. The reality is that respect must be earned daily through consistent behavior and personal integrity. Ultimately, the expectation of respect without earning it leads to isolation. People avoid those who demand admiration but do not give it in return. Relationships suffer, communication breaks down, and frustration grows. Respect cannot be forced, and those who try to demand it will always be met with resistance. The only way to truly gain lasting respect is to embody the values that make others naturally want to give it. Neglecting your health and appearance is one of the fastest ways to diminish your sense of self-worth and the way others perceive you. When a person stops taking care of their body, it sends a message to the world that they no longer value themselves. This is not just about vanity or superficial standards. It is about self-respect, discipline, and the ability to maintain control over one's own life. The way you present yourself physically reflects your mental state and the level of care you have for the life you are given. Your body is the foundation of everything you do. If you allow it to weaken through neglect, everything else in your life suffers as well. Poor health leads to low energy, reduced cognitive function, and a general lack of motivation. When you stop exercising, eating well, and prioritizing your physical well-being, you are setting yourself up for a slow decline in both body and mind. The problem is that once this decline starts, it becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. Appearance is not just about looking good for others. It is about maintaining a sense of dignity and self-respect. When you let go of grooming, hygiene, and dressing well, it is often a reflection of internal struggles. People who respect themselves put in the effort to present themselves in a way that reflects their inner strength. On the other hand, those who neglect their appearance are often battling apathy, depression, or a loss of purpose, whether they realize it or not. One of the greatest dangers of neglecting health and appearance is the message it sends to the people around you. Friends, family, and colleagues, take note when someone stops taking care of themselves. It creates an impression of carelessness, weakness, or even a lack of reliability. Whether fair or not, the world often judges people based on how they carry themselves, and when someone lets themselves go, they may find opportunities, relationships, and respect slipping away. Health neglect is not always an obvious or immediate change. It happens gradually. A missed workout turns into a month of inactivity. A few unhealthy meals become a habit of poor nutrition. Small acts of self-care get replaced by excuses, and before long, the effects are visible. Weight gain, posture decline, skin issues, and a lack of vitality slowly set in. Many people fail to notice these changes in themselves until they look in the mirror one day and no longer recognize the person staring back at them. People who take care of themselves tend to attract better relationships and opportunities. Confidence comes from discipline and self-maintenance, and that confidence is naturally appealing. When someone allows their health and appearance to decline, they often push people away without realizing it. Others may feel uncomfortable addressing it directly, but the shift in perception is real. It can impact friendships, professional interactions, and even romantic relationships in ways that are difficult to recover from. Neglecting physical health leads to deeper consequences than just external appearance. A lack of movement weakens the body, making injuries more likely. Poor diet leads to chronic health issues such as heart disease, diabetes, and inflammation. Sleep deprivation accelerates aging and weakens mental clarity. All of these factors combine to create a cycle of decline that affects not just the individual, but those around them who care about their well-being. There is a misconception that caring about health and appearance is only for the young, but this is false. Longevity and quality of life are directly tied to how well one maintains their body at every stage of life. Many people assume that aging means an inevitable loss of vitality, but in reality, much of what is considered aging is simply the result of prolonged neglect. Those who prioritize their health and presentation in later years often remain sharper, more energetic, and more socially engaged than those who do not. Breaking the cycle of neglect requires intentional action. It means making conscious decisions every day to move, eat well, and maintain personal hygiene. It means refusing to let apathy take hold and recognizing that self-care is not a luxury but a necessity. The most powerful thing a person can do for themselves is to reclaim control over their health and appearance before decline becomes irreversible. Health and appearance are directly tied to self-discipline, self-worth, and how one is perceived by the world. Neglecting them leads to a downward spiral that affects every aspect of life. No one can maintain perfect health forever, but effort matters. Taking care of yourself is not about impressing others, it is about showing yourself and the world that you still have strength, purpose, and a life worth living. Loneliness is a natural part of life, but when left unchecked, it can transform into something far more destructive: bitterness. At first, it starts as a quiet ache, a sense of isolation that lingers in the background of daily life. But over time, if a person does not confront their loneliness with awareness and effort, it festers. It becomes resentment toward others, toward society, and even toward life itself. What was once a longing for connection turns into a belief that the world has abandoned them. And this shift in mindset begins to color every interaction. Bitterness does not emerge overnight. It is the result of repeated disappointments, unmet expectations, and a lack of meaningful connection. A lonely person may begin to feel invisible, overlooked by the very people they once cared for. When these emotions go unaddressed, they harden into a rigid worldview. Instead of seeing moments of loneliness as temporary or solvable, they start to believe that isolation is permanent, that no one truly cares, and that relationships are no longer worth pursuing. One of the most dangerous aspects of bitterness is that it pushes people even further away. A lonely person still has the chance to build connections, to reach out, to find new meaning in relationships. But a bitter person repels others without realizing it. Their words become laced with cynicism. Their demeanor becomes cold, and their presence carries an unspoken resentment. People instinctively avoid bitterness, sensing the hostility beneath it, which only deepens the cycle of isolation. Bitterness reshapes the way a person interprets the world. When someone is lonely but hopeful, they see kindness in small gestures and opportunities for connection. When loneliness turns into bitterness, they assume the worst. A friend who forgets to call is seen as careless rather than busy. A stranger's neutral expression is misread as judgment. Bitterness warps perception, making it difficult to recognize genuine acts of warmth and leaving a person convinced that they are alone because others have failed them. This transformation also leads to a lack of self-awareness. The bitter individual does not see how their own energy contributes to their loneliness. They blame others for their isolation, while ignoring the ways in which they have withdrawn. Invitations are declined, conversations become filled with complaints, and the walls they build to protect themselves from further hurt become the very barriers that keep them alone. They convince themselves that no one understands them, but in reality they have stopped allowing people the chance to do so. Loneliness, when met with bitterness, breeds envy. Seeing others in happy relationships, watching younger generations build friendships, or even witnessing strangers share laughter can trigger resentment. Instead of inspiring action or reflection, it fuels a sense of injustice. Why do they get to have what I don't? Becomes the dominant thought. This envy does not lead to change. It leads to further self-pity and detachment, reinforcing the idea that life has been unfair, rather than recognizing that effort is required to maintain relationships. A person consumed by bitterness often adopts a victim mentality. They begin to believe that their loneliness is the fault of others, that they have been wronged, and that they are powerless to change it. This mindset is not just damaging, it is paralyzing. It removes responsibility and agency, making it easy to sink deeper into isolation without making any attempt to reconnect. They assume that if people truly cared, they would reach out, not realizing that relationships require reciprocity, effort, and vulnerability. Bitterness does not just affect emotions, it affects health. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness and resentment lead to increased stress, weakened immune function, and even cognitive decline. A mind consumed by bitterness is a mind in a constant state of tension, replaying past grievances and expecting future disappointments. The body responds accordingly, deteriorating faster under the weight of negative emotions, making physical ailments more likely and recovery more difficult. The saddest part of bitterness is that it often stems from a deep desire for love and connection. Beneath the hardened exterior is someone who once cared deeply, who wanted companionship, who longed for understanding. But instead of seeking healing, they have allowed past wounds to define them. Instead of taking risks to build new relationships, they have chosen the safety of resentment. Instead of forgiving and moving forward, they have clung to the past, unaware that their own grip is what keeps them trapped. The difference between loneliness and bitterness is choice. Loneliness is a condition that can be changed. A lonely person can find connection again, but a bitter person must first be willing to let go of their resentment before they can even begin that journey. The world is full of opportunities for connection, but it requires an open heart, a willingness to try, and the courage to step beyond the comfort of anger and into the unknown possibilities of human connection.